Hey everyone, it's Bob Crossan, Senior Managing Editor for Water and Waste Digest, and I have a special episode for you all today with Andria Hannegan. She is a pre-treatment coordinator for the City of Sumner, Washington, and also is one of our 2022 WWD Young Pros. Now, you'll recall from last year we did an interview with each one of them, and we're going to be doing the same thing this year, starting with Andria. Thank you, Andrea, for being here. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Hi, good morning. It is definitely an honor for me to be here today, and it's my pleasure. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and congratulations. I know that we had talked a little before the call that you were even surprised that you were nominated. So congratulations on the on being named a young professional for 2022.
No, thank you. Yep, it did come as a surprise. I wasn't expecting it, and so I think when it came through, it came with a couple other spams that had crossed our spam emails that had crossed through our filters. So I kind of just disregarded it with them, and then had to circle back
Yeah.
um, once a call called. Yeah, so it's pretty funny, but
Yeah. Well,
but
why
yeah,
don't you
I was very honored and surprised. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about your career path? How did you get to the position you are now? You're pre-treatment coordinator for the City of Sumner, but what was your path to get there? Could you talk a little bit about your experience and also why water?
Sure. Yeah. Um, I guess I'll start from the beginning and go through my experience. So when I got out of high school, like many of us, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And so I took an opportunity to take some time away, and I volunteered with a nonprofit organization called Youth with a Mission. And they had this program that gave an opportunity to travel abroad and do work abroad. And I came back and I decided I wanted to join staff and work with them just a little bit longer before taking the traditional route and going to school. I ended up working with them for about 5 years, and the last year that I was with them, I lived in Kalimpong, India, um, which is in the Himalayas, and it is kind of nestled. Yeah, so it's in the Himalayas. Um, I worked with I moved out with an American couple who were distributing buckets with a filtration mechanism inside. Um, very basic, very easy to use, and they would go along with this Dutch medical team to villages, and we would teach about the importance of clean water and distribute these filters and offer basic medical services. And it's at that point when I realized, like, yeah, the biggest difference between a first world and a third world country is their water and sewer infrastructure.
Yeah.
And I took that back with me, and I decided that's where I found a passion in learning more and doing more in the water quality field. I eventually had an opportunity to take a position with the town of Culpeper as their lab manager
Okay.
for their wastewater treatment plant. And at that time, I was going to some lab conferences, but I was also given the opportunity to join their, I think it's the APWA
Oh,
pre-treatment
okay.
conferences in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I started attending those annually, and that's where I found an interest in specifically in industrial wastewater treatment. Had an opportunity to transition into the position of pre-treatment coordinator with the town of Culpeper.
Hmm.
And from there, I was offered a job while working in Culpeper at a sewer district in Vancouver, Washington. Um,
Hmm.
at the time, I had an interest to move to the West Coast. So I had been applying for some jobs, and I applied for the pre-treatment coordinator, and um, I was offered it, and I moved with my two dogs and my husband at the time cross country, settled in, and I was in Vancouver for about 5 years, moved north, and eventually took a position with the City of Sumner.
Yeah.
It's
Quite,
been,
quite the path.
yeah, progressive and, kind of hopping here and there, but pretreatment is really where I found my niche, and
Mhm.
I really enjoy.
Yeah. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about, do you have a favorite project that you've done? Is there something in pre-treatment, for example, that like you're like this project really solidified why I love what I do?
Sure. Yeah, I think I was trying to think about my experience over the last, I guess, 15 years. And I think I would work pretty consistently and routinely when I was with the environmental consulting firm. I would work with a local power generation station, and we performed a copper BLM or a water effects ratio study for them to identify a site specific limits for that facility. And I just really liked coming in and supporting the industry through compliance and being creative and finding solutions of what technologies and what kind of treatment systems were appropriate and would work for
Hmm.
them. And, and since then, I've done similar projects. But I think second to that, right now I have the opportunity to develop and implement an industrial pretreatment program for the City of Sumner. They had not previously
Oh.
had a program, so I'm the first pretreatment coordinator for the City of Sumner, and I'm working through the program manual, and it's just really nice to be able to start doing things the way that I feel that the way that we want them to be done, rather than the old standby of that's just kind of how it's always been done. So it's a really unique opportunity, and I think that stands out a lot to me as well.
Yeah. Now, what I'm hearing from you is it seems like you really like the puzzle of the problem and being able to slot in all the different solutions and like make it a full picture and look at it at the end and be like, "Wow, I did it." Like
Yeah, I really do.
I get
Yeah.
I feel like I get that a lot from folks who work with industrial water or wastewater is that it is very much a puzzle because it's this constantly moving and evolving thing. Like there's always the talk of like, well, I gotta protect my bugs and like right? So there's like this whole idea that it's like it's this constantly evolving and moving and shifting puzzle that's like so fun to play with kind of a
It is.
thing.
It really is. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to pivot a little bit. You talked about this a little bit earlier was the Himalayas. And I wanted to ask a little bit more about, so you mentioned a little bit of how that came about, but that also tied into some of your other interests, like backpacking, and specifically there was something in there too about like peak bagging or something like that. Could you talk a little bit about like how like did working in the Himalayas or volunteering there like influence your interest in like hiking and climbing in these like high elevation areas, or was that always something that like intrigued you?
Well, I grew up in the foothills of the Blue Ridge, so
Okay.
I've always liked hiking and being in the mountains, but I really didn't take it seriously. I had a traditional small town, experience growing up, but in the Himalayas, it absolutely sparked an interest in, um, backpacking,
Hmm.
more like intense and actual backpacking events, but I was so busy with the volunteer work that other than schlepping it from village to village and a couple like sunrises here and there, I really didn't take advantage of it. I'm crying, now as an adult, we oftentimes think back to our younger years and say, oh, really, I didn't enjoy that as much as I should have, or I would have now. So in the last couple of years, I kind of rediscovered that passion or that interest, and discovered peak bagging too. I didn't even, when I was in the Himalayas, I didn't even know that was a thing. So
Yeah, it was a
um,
new word for me too, so I had to look it up.
yeah, yeah, because I feel like it's yeah. I mean, I could say summiting because I just specifically I like climbing up a really steep grading to a really high elevation to the tippy toppest point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just looking out at everything. Two components to that. Just seeing the world from up high. You know, that is
Yeah.
just I have to explain why.
Yeah.
But then also the challenge to get there because usually it's pretty hard. And I
Yeah.
like being able to be at the very top and say that I did it
Yeah.
and that I didn't give up and I pushed myself through it. And then I
Yeah.
can do hard things. So,
Yeah, well, I feel like I can relate to an extent with this because I'm a cyclist and I
oh,
riding bikes uphill to the beautiful spot and knowing how difficult it is to do that, and then you get to the top and you see this gorgeous view, you're like, it was all worth it. And then you get to go
yeah,
downhill going really fast, which is another reward. But
yes,
but yeah,
exactly.
I totally understand what you mean because you do see things from like a totally different area or angle. There's a tranquility about that feeling of being somewhere so up high and seeing everything from so far away. It allows you to get that like almost emotional detachment to allow you to kind of like experience the moment, right?
Exactly. And I mean, with that, as I'm climbing, as I'm pushing it, I have to be there. You know, I have to
Yes.
be mindful, I have to be in the moment, or, you know, I could hurt myself. And so that is a really good practice too. I really like the opportunity to practice mindfulness in that way and really just being present, focusing on what I'm doing and not letting myself worry about whatever, you know, scheduling or planning that I'm thinking about
Yeah.
or work or
Is there
intentionally.
is there a summit that you have summited that you're most proud of? What was that like?
I mean, you know, most proud of would probably not be Mount St. Helens,
Okay.
because most people, I guess, you know, most people know Mount St. Helens. You know, and when we did that, we left really early in the morning, and I was able to watch the sunrise off of Mount Adams, um, and it was gorgeous. And then we walked along the crater to the highest point of the crater. And so that was really kind of neat, but it's not really like a peak, right? A summit.
Yeah.
But the peak that holds a place in my heart that is my favorite that I try to do every year is a peak. I think it's only like 6,000 feet, but it was where I got my start and where I found my love for peak bagging.
Okay.
And it's called Crystal Peak over
Okay.
off of near Rainier, Mount Rainier.
Okay.
And yeah, and I kind of start my climb, you know, my season there every year.
Hmm.
And then I'm kind of progressing into more technical climbs. Like I'll be doing Mount Shuksan this August,
Oh, cool.
and maybe Baker in June. But there's a lot of
Yeah.
planning involved, and you have to get permits and you know all this stuff. So
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
getting there, a lot of
Yeah.
the stuff. But yeah, I
That's
think.
Yeah, that's so cool. And my brother lives in Seattle, so I'm very familiar with Rainier and Baker as well.
Oh,
And
okay.
so they're
Yeah.
both gorgeous mountains to see from afar. I can only imagine what it's like to be on
Yeah.
one.
Oh, and Mount Eleanor, I really like the view from Mount Eleanor. You can see Tacoma. This is over
Oh,
in the
cool.
Olympics,
Yeah.
and so you can see Tacoma. And it's a pretty hard hike up. Oh, I think it's a hard hike. There might be some people. I mean, there's a race that goes. There are people who run it, and they go up. And yes,
Oh my goodness. Wow.
so obviously it's not terrible for some people, but I think it's like uh, 2,000 feet and like at the very end you gain like I don't know 2,000 feet and maybe a mile or something.
Yeah. Oh my
Pretty
goodness. Yeah. The people will make a competition over anything.
yeah,
Well, but I want to pivot us back a little bit to talk about some of your work before we close out. Could you talk about your experience with the Northwest Pollution Prevention Resource Center? I had to look at my notes to get that one right. And then you
yes,
also do some work with the Oregon Water Education Foundation. Why is it so critical to you that you be a part of both of those organizations? And what type of value do you hope that gives to others as well?
sure, yeah. So when I moved to the Pacific Northwest, you know, there are everything, they're the same federal standards everywhere,
Yeah.
but some of the state standards were different. And I, you know, the dynamic of the rainy season and all the rain, it was a little bit different than what I was used to in Virginia. And so I decided to just get really involved, which is easy for me. Because I just like to be active and involved where I can. And I'm also a hand raiser. So my first experience with volunteering with these training associations was with the Pacific Northwest Source Control Training Association. And so I volunteered on their planning committee, and they planned the industrial pretreatment workshop in Vancouver, Washington. So we have that every year. We're going to have it in person this year for sure. And so I'm really looking forward to that. But I have been working with them since 2013. I chaired that planning committee, I think, since 2017.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay.
and I was on the board as well, but we dissolved the associations so that the Pacific Northwest Pollution Prevention Resource Center, PPRC, could get involved and sponsor that workshop because they have a lot more experience putting on these training sessions. And it's just been a really good experience since they've joined us, because before that, it was just a group of local pretreatment regulators from Oregon and Washington. We volunteered our time. Once a month, we'd meet up and coordinate this workshop, work conference. It's about 2.5 days. So I found, and at the same time, I was invited to join in with the Oregon Water Education Foundation. They also have a short school, or we call it Water Environment School, out of the Clackamas Community College, just outside of Portland, Oregon. And that's been going on for, like 40 years. They've been doing that school. And so I got involved just as a planning committee member there. And I think in 2016 is when I accepted the position as president for that organization. They sponsor the school. And then I've also worked with the WSA, which works through PPRC. They do a lot of more fog-centric training. Okay. Western States Alliance, what they are, what their full name. So sorry, I'll back up. But the intention of getting involved so directly in these training associations was just so that I can network, meet the people in the region, and just learn more, or expedite my the process of learning all the new state and local regulations, right?
Yeah.
But then I learned that it's so valuable in the pretreatment community to network in this way, because you don't really have the same industries come and go. And if I have a new business coming into town, a seafood processor, well, they may have either moved from somewhere, obviously, or have a sister company, and I can, networking in this way and becoming active in the regional pretreatment community allowed me to make those contacts and connections, so I could reach out and say, and then also if we're seeing issues in the collection system or the treatment plant that we think have been contributed by an industrial source, I can reach out to this community. Hey, have you seen this before? We have a really great, I forget what it's called. It used to be a Yahoo Groups. I think it's on Groups.io now, but it's a pretreatment forum. And we just go on, ask a question, and you get so many resources and so much insight and so much value. So that's where I initially found the value. And second to that, I really think for myself, it's important to advocate for these for technical training, right? professional training that's separate from the traditional 4-year path, right? 4-year university.
Yeah.
Because not a lot of people have the opportunity to go to college. I am from that path. You know, I when I left high school, I volunteered and I never finished my a degree with that community college that I started working at started with when I returned from the Himalayas. Because, you know, life happens and that's
Yeah.
very common for everyone. And so because I was able to take these classes and learn through technical training early in my career, I was able to become a subject matter expert in
Yeah.
my field, and progress my career in the way that I have,
Mhm.
without having done the 4-year degree program.
Yeah.
Now, with that, I do see a value in it. You know, it's very hard work, and so I don't want to be dismissive. And I am pursuing a degree program now, but I think that was also a component of why I just feel so passionate about working actively within these volunteer training associations.
Yeah, it sounds to me like the networking is just like such a critical component of that. That having that network is also a support group, right? Like it allows you to feel less isolated when you might feel isolated working as the only pretreatment person at your facility, right? So having that
Absolutely.
avenue and like having peers is like really valuable in that way.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, last question, which I'll be asking to all the young professionals. I did it last year. I'm sure everyone watching also recognizes that too. Is how do you think the industry can better cater to the next generation of a water professional? What values do you think we can use to bring them in? And are there areas of the industry that you think are places that we can really bring in that next generation?
Yeah, I touched on it, I think, briefly um, in my application answers.
Yeah,
And so I kind of want to, I want to stick with that, you know, because there's just so many things that we could really influence. There's so many ways we can influence the future generations. That's a big question. And I appreciate it. It's allows me to be, to be thoughtful about that because it's important. With, I'm raising two of the next generations, but they're they're two young women, and they're getting excited about science and water, wastewater. So I think that my answer is that, we can really, the way that I'd like to see our generation influence the next generation, um, of the people working in the water sector, is to really focus on diversifying the workforce and making it easily accessible to people from different walks of life, and encouraging that, encouraging a diverse
yeah.
and inclusive um, environment in the water sector.
Yeah, by making sure accessibility is a high level concern, it also means that you're getting the information in their hands or giving them an idea that this is an option that exists, right? Because I think I mean, I think you've hit on a good point here that I hear a lot, which is a lot of kids don't even know that this type of arena exists.
Yeah,
And being able to make that more visible also increases accessibility at the same time, right? Because now suddenly
absolutely.
more people know that they have an avenue to them. So
Yeah.
oh, that's a beautiful answer. I loved it.
Yeah, and people in my circle, most of my family and friends, they know me as like a wastewater nerd, and I'm always talking about it. But I always have an opportunity to talk with a young person or someone who's really trying to figure out what they want to do with their life, and I always advocate for water or sewer because the water quality sector is just so robust. There are so many different things you can get into, and the more diverse, the more creative solutions we can come up with, the more the different, the varying backgrounds really impact the ideas that we come up with, the solutions that we end up with. So, and then we could potentially avoid what is the, I don't know, there's a term for it, but in the last decade or so, we've been facing a very large retirement kind of.
The silver tsunami, is that what
There
you're looking
it
for?
is. Yeah, so we can avoid that. We
Yeah.
can get build it up, and so that we didn't have that
Yeah.
big fallout.
Yeah,
But yeah,
you touched on another good point there, which is the variety of career options, right? It's not like you do this pre-treatment stuff, but I mean, if you look at the other young professionals that we're highlighting this year, you'll see so many different titles with so many different things, whether it's research, communications, marketing, like you could do it all. The whole industry needs all these people. So I think you've
yeah,
really hit on some two really critical things to bring forward. So I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much for talking with me, Andrea. I really appreciated this conversation, and I loved hearing about your time in the Himalayas and, of course, your career path as well. And for everyone who is watching, you can definitely check out the video description below. We'll have some links to the young professionals, so check those out. You can read more about them there. And stay tuned next week for another Young Professionals video interview.
thank you.